Millionaire arrives unannounced at family lunch and freezes at the scene before him. Richard Hale came home 24 hours earlier than planned. There were no flowers, no gifts, no warning call, just an expensive leather suitcase resting quietly in the trunk and a tired man standing still before the towering iron gates of the Hale mansion. A thin drizzle clung to the windshield like cold mist, blurring his reflection until even he barely recognized the face staring back. For the past 10 years, Richard had grown used to returning home in silence. Endless business trips, meetings across time zones, contracts signed over dinner instead of shared meals. To him, the mansion had never truly been a home. It felt more like a perfectly run 5-star hotel, everything in its place, spotless, luxurious, and cold. He assumed tonight would be no different. In his mind, Evelyn Moore, his fiancée, was probably busy trying on dresses for an upcoming event or staring into her phone, carefully curating her social media image. And his 3 6-year-old daughters, Lily, Emma, and Chloe, were likely tucked away in their rooms, supervised by others, learning proper behavior according to standards he was rarely present to challenge. Richard stepped into the grand foyer. The vast space greeted him with familiar stillness. No laughter, no tiny footsteps racing across marble floors. Only the steady ticking of the wall clock, dry and relentless, reminding him that time continued to pass whether he was there or not. He loosened his tie and exhaled slowly. A feeling he couldn't quite name settled in his chest, not exactly longing, not quite sadness. It was more like an extended emptiness, something money, power, and reputation had never been able to fill. Richard had just set his suitcase down at the foot of the staircase when an unfamiliar sound reached his ears. Soft, but clear enough to make him stop in the middle of the foyer. It wasn't the television, not a phone. It was children's voices, gentle, steady, and calm. He frowned slightly and listened more closely. The sounds weren't chaotic like playful noise, nor did they carry the stiffness of forced lessons. They blended together naturally, like a collective whisper. Richard walked slowly toward the dining room, his heartbeat quickening with every step. Warm yellow light spilled through the slightly open doorway, a sharp contrast to the cold emptiness of the grand hall behind him. And then he saw them. His 3 little daughters, Lily, Emma, and Chloe, were sitting neatly around the large oak dining table. In front of them were not elaborate gourmet dishes arranged to perfection, but simple plates of spaghetti covered in bright red tomato sauce, still gently steaming. But what froze Richard in place wasn't the food. The 3 children had their hands clasped in front of their chests, eyes closed, faces calm, peaceful, almost unfamiliar. "Thank you, God, for our food today," Lily began, her voice slightly shaky but clear. "And thank you for the person who cooked for us," Emma continued, glancing softly toward the woman standing beside the table. That woman was not Evelyn. It was Anna, the new housekeeper Richard vaguely remembered hiring through an agency a few weeks earlier. She wore a plain uniform, no jewelry, no makeup, her hands covered with worn yellow rubber gloves. Yet her face radiated a gentleness that felt deeply out of place in a mansion like this, as if she were standing in her own home. "And please bring Daddy home soon," Chloe whispered, the smallest voice of all, yet the one that tightened Richard's chest the most. "Because we miss him." A chill ran down his spine. Richard stepped back instinctively, something inside him telling him not to let them know he was there. He leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling like a stranger spying on the most intimate moment of his own family. Anna smiled as the girls opened their eyes. It wasn't the smile of an employee trying to please her employers. It was warm, sincere, without calculation. "All right, my little angels," she said softly. "Let's eat before it gets cold. Remember to blow on it. It's still hot." The girls giggled and eagerly picked up their forks. No one corrected their posture. No one monitored every small movement. No judging eyes hovered over the table. Richard swallowed hard. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen his daughters laugh so naturally during a meal. The dinners he attended were always tense, rigid, rehearsed, like practice sessions for the flawless upper-class life Evelyn demanded. This was different. Here there was order without fear, respect without pressure, and the most painful realization of all was this. In this moment, his children looked happier than he had ever seen them. He didn't know yet that this fragile peace was about to be violently shattered. The moment of peace didn't last. The sharp, rhythmic sound of high heels striking marble echoed from the hallway, slicing through the warm air of the dining room like hammer blows. The three children froze instantly. Laughter vanished. Forks stopped midair. Anna looked up even before the woman appeared. The smile left her face so quickly that Richard realized it wasn't a reaction. It was a defensive instinct, one learned over time. Evelyn Moore stormed into the dining room like a perfectly dressed hurricane. An expensive coat draped loosely over her shoulders, phone still in hand, her makeup flawless, but her eyes were cold, sharp. "What the hell is going on here?" Evelyn snapped, her voice loud and cutting. The girls shrank in their chairs. Chloe dropped her fork, the soft clink of metal against porcelain sending a sharp pain through Richard's chest. Evelyn's gaze swept across the table, stopping on the bright red plates of spaghetti as if they personally offended her. "This is what you're feeding them?" she snarled, turning on Anna. "I gave clear instructions. Today was salmon and vegetables. What do you think you're doing?" Anna lowered her head, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Ms. Evelyn, the girls didn't want the fish. They haven't—" "You're not paid to think," Evelyn cut her off, her voice like a blade. "You're paid to obey, and you're giving them this carbohydrate-filled garbage?" Richard felt his fists clench in the shadows. He had never heard Evelyn speak like this before. Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes scanning the children. "Look at them. You want them fat and sloppy like you?" she said coldly. Emma pressed her lips together as tears welled up. Lily stiffened. Chloe trembled and grabbed onto Anna's skirt. "Please," Anna said softly, stepping forward, positioning herself between Evelyn and the table like a fragile shield. "If you're angry, be angry at me. Don't speak to them like that. They're just hungry." Evelyn laughed, a dry, cruel sound devoid of humanity. She grabbed the plate in front of Chloe. "Hungry? Then they can starve." With a violent motion, she hurled the plate against the wall. The crash of shattered porcelain echoed through the room, tomato sauce splattering across the pale wallpaper like an open wound. The three children burst into tears. Chloe slid off her chair and ran to cling to Anna's legs. Emma and Lily followed, clinging to her as if she were the only safe place left. "Get away from her," Evelyn shouted. "Go to your rooms. Now. No dinner tonight. That's your punishment for disobedience." Richard felt his blood boil, but he stayed hidden. From the shadows he watched the naked truth of the woman he had planned to marry, and he understood that this moment was only the beginning. Richard stood motionless in the darkness of the hallway, his back pressed against the cold wall. Each sob echoing up the staircase cut into his chest like a blade. He could have stepped out right then. One step, one word, one firm command, and it would have been over. Evelyn would have turned around, changed her tone, cried, made excuses. Anna would have been spared. His daughters would have been pulled into the safety of their father's arms. But Richard didn't move, not because he was a coward, but because he understood the woman he was dealing with. Evelyn wasn't impulsive. What he had just witnessed wasn't a momentary loss of temper. It was her true nature, revealed only when no powerful audience was present to restrain her. If he appeared now, she would instantly play the victim, blaming stress, exhaustion, and her good intentions for the children and then everything would continue behind his back. Richard clenched his jaw. Guilt rose in his throat, thick and suffocating. He faced a painful truth. His constant absence had allowed someone like Evelyn to take control of his children's lives. He had handed her that power. From the shadows, Richard watched Anna kneel down, wrapping her arms around the three trembling girls. She whispered something, too softly for him to hear. But gradually, the children began to calm, even as tears continued to stream down their faces. She didn't fight back. She didn't argue. She didn't demand justice. She simply protected his daughters. A cold, dangerous anger began to form inside Richard, not the explosive kind, but the quiet determination of a man who had just realized he had trusted the wrong person for far too long. "This isn't enough," he thought. "I need to see everything." He needed to know how far Evelyn would go, whether her cruelty had limits, and most importantly, he needed proof, something no excuse could erase. Richard stepped deeper into the shadows and took a slow breath to steady the storm inside his chest. Tonight he would pretend he knew nothing, but from this moment on he would no longer be the blind man he once was. Richard barely slept that night. By the time the pale gray light of dawn filtered through the heavy curtains of his study, he was already seated at his desk, tie removed, a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hand. The rain from the night before had left long streaks across the glass, like faint scratches on a surface that once seemed flawless. For the first time in years, Richard didn't go to the office. He canceled every meeting on his schedule, citing a family emergency. But he knew the truth. The most important meeting of his life was about to take place inside this house. Before him stretched a row of high-definition security monitors. He had installed the internal system months earlier, supposedly to guard against kidnappings or intrusions. Evelyn knew about the cameras at the gates and hallways, but she didn't know Richard had secretly added discrete devices in the shared living spaces. He had never used them to watch his family. Until today. Monitor 3 came to life. The kitchen appeared in the soft early light. The timestamp read 6:15 a.m. Anna stepped into frame, her small figure wrapped in the familiar uniform. She paused for a moment, placed a hand over her chest, and made the sign of the cross before beginning her work. There was no one watching, no audience to perform for. Richard leaned forward. Anna prepared breakfast, cutting fruit, boiling water, every movement efficient yet gentle. 3 small lunchboxes were placed neatly on the counter, each with a folded note tucked inside. Richard zoomed in. The handwriting was clumsy but careful. "Have a beautiful day." His chest tightened. Just before 7, Evelyn entered the frame. She wore a silk robe, a face mask, eyes glued to her phone. She didn't look at Anna. She didn't greet her. "The coffee's cold," Evelyn said sharply. "Make another, and make sure the girls are ready in 10 minutes. I have yoga." "Yes, ma'am," Anna replied, pouring out the freshly brewed coffee without complaint. Richard gripped the armrest of his chair. On another screen, the 3 girls appeared at the top of the stairs. Lily, Emma, and Chloe wore their uniforms, backpacks on their shoulders, faces still heavy with sleep. When they entered the kitchen, they didn't run to Evelyn. Their eyes searched for Anna. Only when Anna turned and smiled did the atmosphere shift. Their shoulders relaxed. Their steps slowed. "Anna, can you fix my hair?" Chloe asked softly, touching her forehead. "There's no time for that," Evelyn snapped without turning around. "Anna has work to do." Anna glanced at the clock, then at Evelyn, then at Chloe. Finally, she quietly pulled a small comb from her pocket. "Come here, sweetheart. Just a moment," she whispered. She held the roots carefully so it wouldn't hurt, every movement gentle, almost ceremonial. As she worked, Lily spoke up. "Anna, is Dad mad at us?" Richard held his breath. "No, my love," Anna replied, tying the ribbon in Chloe's hair. "Your dad loves you more than anything. He just has to work very hard." "Evelyn says we're a burden," Emma murmured. Anna knelt to their level, taking their small hands in hers. "Never believe that. You are a gift. Anyone would be lucky to have you." Richard leaned back in his chair, eyes burning. There was no obsession, no manipulation, only a woman filling the void he had left unattended for far too long. And then, on the screen, a cold gaze flickered behind Anna's back. Richard hadn't taken his eyes off the screen when it happened. Evelyn turned around, not casually, but sharply, precisely, as if she had sensed something that didn't belong to her. That look, cold, narrow, calculating, landed on Anna's back. Richard recognized it instantly. It wasn't the look of ordinary jealousy. It was the look of someone who had just made a decision. On the screen, Evelyn took a few steps toward the table, where Anna's worn cloth bag rested neatly on a chair. She glanced around quickly. Anna's back was turned as she washed dishes. The three girls were busy with their backpacks, paying no attention to the adults. It all happened in less than 2 seconds. Evelyn lifted her hand to her wrist and removed a sparkling piece of jewelry, the bracelet Richard clearly remembered, his engagement gift. With a motion so practiced it was chilling, she dropped it into Anna's open bag. Then Evelyn straightened. She smiled. Not a polite smile, not a satisfied one. It was the smile of someone who had just set a trap and was completely certain the prey would never see it coming. Richard sprang to his feet, the coffee cup on his desk tipped over, dark liquid spilling across documents, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the screen, every muscle in his body rigid. He had seen enough. Every piece snapped together with brutal clarity. Last night's threats. Evelyn's cold confidence. The way she spoke of accusations. Those weren't words spoken in anger. They were plans. Richard drew a deep breath and forced himself to sit back down. His first instinct was to rush to the kitchen, pull the bracelet from Anna's bag, and expose Evelyn immediately. But the image of his daughters that morning, tired, frightened, fragile, rose in his mind. No, not like this. If he acted now, Evelyn would still have room to twist the story. It would be his word against hers. Another confrontation his children would be forced to witness. Richard stared at the screen one last time. Anna was still washing dishes, completely unaware that a bomb had just been planted inside her bag. "Hold on a little longer, Anna," he whispered. "This time, the truth won't be buried." He reached out and shut down the camera system. The game had begun. Evening settled over the Hale mansion like a heavy weight, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable. The dining room had been prepared with unusual precision, a spotless white tablecloth, silver cutlery polished until it reflected the chandelier's glow, crystal glasses aligned perfectly. Everything was flawless, so flawless it felt cold. Richard entered the room with a composed expression. No one could see the storm raging beneath his calm exterior, tightly restrained to the point of pain. The three girls were already seated. Lily, Emma, and Chloe wore the beautiful dresses Evelyn had chosen. But they weren't smiling. Backs straight, hands resting on their laps, their eyes occasionally darted toward the kitchen door, where Anna was preparing to serve. They were waiting, not for the food, but for whatever was about to happen tonight. Evelyn arrived last. She wore a dark, fitted dress, hair perfectly styled, her wrist deliberately bare. On her lips was the familiar, gentle smile, the one Richard had once trusted completely. "It's so nice to have the whole family together for dinner," Evelyn said sweetly, as if yesterday's screams had never existed. Richard pulled out his chair and sat across from her. "It is," he replied evenly. "A very special dinner." Anna emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of food. She had changed out of her uniform into simple clothes, her face tense but composed. When she saw Richard, she lowered her head briefly in greeting, then quickly avoided his gaze. Richard noticed her hands were trembling. The meal began in silence. Only the dry clink of cutlery against plates echoed through the room. Evelyn watched Anna's every movement, her sharp gaze hidden beneath a mask of politeness. "This is a bit dry, don't you think?" Evelyn finally said, breaking the silence. "I suppose the help isn't very refined." "I think it's fine," Richard replied. "The girls are eating well. That's what matters." Evelyn smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. She glanced down at her wrist and suddenly froze. "Wait," Evelyn said, her voice rising just enough to draw attention. "Where's my bracelet?" The girls stopped eating. Anna froze. Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Evelyn. "Are you sure you didn't leave it on your vanity?" "No," Evelyn shook her head sharply. "I wore it all day, and there's only one person who was near me all afternoon." Her gaze slowly turned toward Anna. The air in the room solidified. Richard felt every beat of his heart with absolute clarity. He knew this moment was coming, and he knew that from this second on there would be no turning back. The air in the dining room thickened, as if every sound had been swallowed whole. Evelyn stood there, her gaze locked on Anna, the corner of her lips curling into a perfectly calculated mix of shock and indignation. She placed a hand over her chest and took a deep breath, like a woman deeply wounded. "Anna," Evelyn said slowly, each word deliberate, "you were very close to me this afternoon, weren't you?" Anna swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I was only doing my job." "Then this is very strange," Evelyn continued, her voice rising, "because my bracelet, worth tens of thousands of dollars, has disappeared." The three girls glanced at one another. Chloe pressed closer to Lily. Emma lowered her head, gripping the hem of her dress tightly. "What are you implying?" Richard asked, his tone frighteningly calm. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes shimmering with tears. "I don't want to believe this, Richard, but I can't ignore facts. In this house, there's only one person who isn't family." The words landed like a hammer. Anna stepped back. "No, I didn't take anything. I swear to God." Evelyn let out a soft laugh. "Oaths don't replace evidence." She turned to Richard. "I suggest we check her bag, right now." Anna shook her head in panic. "Please, sir, I didn't do this." Chloe burst into tears. "Anna isn't bad." "Be quiet," Evelyn snapped, spinning toward the child. "This is an adult matter." Richard stood up. In one step, he positioned himself between Evelyn and Anna. "Calm down," he said. "We'll clarify this." Evelyn grabbed Anna's worn cloth bag from the chair. "No need to complicate things," she said. "If she's innocent, she has nothing to fear." She turned the bag upside down onto the table. An old wallet, a wooden rosary, a pack of tissues, keys. And then the sparkling bracelet fell onto the wooden table with a cold metallic sound. Evelyn exhaled sharply, as if vindicated. "See," she said loudly. "I told you." Anna collapsed to her knees. "No, I didn't know it was there. Someone put it there, I swear." "Enough," Evelyn snapped. "You're a thief in front of my children." Lily jumped from her chair and ran to wrap her arms around Anna. "No, she's good. She takes care of us." Emma and Chloe sobbed, clinging to Anna's dress like it was the last place of safety. "Call the police," Evelyn said, turning to Richard. "I won't allow someone like this to stay in my house." Richard bent down and picked up the bracelet. It was ice cold in his palm. He looked up. "You're right," Richard said in a low voice. "This is a crime." Evelyn smiled, victory clear on her face. "And someone is going to pay a very high price," Richard continued. The smile froze on Evelyn's lips. Richard placed the bracelet back on the table, slowly. It wasn't the gesture of an angry man. It was the movement of someone who had fully mastered his rage. Evelyn still stood there, chin slightly raised, eyes glittering with the certainty of victory. In that moment, she was convinced the game was over, and she had won. Before calling the police, Richard said calmly, his voice low and steady, "I think we should all watch something." Evelyn frowned. "Richard, isn't this clear enough already?" Richard didn't answer. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small remote. Anna looked up, eyes red with confusion. The three girls held their breath. Richard pointed the remote toward the far wall. The large television, always off during meals, flickered to life. The black screen shifted to a familiar image. The kitchen, the date and time glowed in the corner. 6:47 a.m. That same morning, Evelyn's face drained of color. On the screen, Anna stood with her back turned, washing dishes. The girls were gathering their backpacks. Then Evelyn in the video appeared, not the elegant woman standing in the dining room now, but another version. Tense, furtive, eyes darting. The room seemed to stop breathing. On screen, Evelyn removed the bracelet from her own wrist. The motion was smooth, deliberate. She bent down and dropped it into Anna's open cloth bag. The video ended. Silence fell, heavy and tangible. Chloe began to cry. Emma covered her mouth. Lily stared at Evelyn with a child's eyes that suddenly held a frightening clarity. Anna raised a hand to her mouth, her body trembling, not with fear anymore, but because the truth had finally been seen. Evelyn stepped back. "Richard, you have to let me explain." Her voice cracked. "No," Richard cut her off, his tone cold as steel. "That's enough." He stepped forward, facing Evelyn. No shouting, no insults, just the calm of a man who finally saw everything clearly. "You humiliated my children, you threatened an innocent woman, and you tried to turn my daughters into tools for your control." Evelyn shook her head violently, tears streaming. "I just wanted what was best." "No," Richard said. "You wanted power." He turned to Anna, his voice softening. "You did nothing wrong." Then he faced Evelyn again, his eyes holding no hesitation. "This engagement ends here." The front door closed behind Evelyn with a dull, final sound. No more high heels, no more expensive perfume, no more presence that made the house feel like it was constantly bracing itself. Only silence remained. Richard stood still for a few seconds, as if relearning how to breathe inside his own home. Then he turned around. The three girls had left the table. Lily, Emma, and Chloe were clinging tightly to Anna in the corner of the room, small shoulders trembling, but no longer in fear. This wasn't the embrace of children clinging to a servant. It was the embrace of children who had just been saved. Richard walked toward them slowly. "Anna," he said, his voice rough, "I'm sorry." She looked up, confused. "Sir." "I'm sorry for not being here," Richard continued, "for letting you, and my daughters, endure things you never should have." Anna shook her head as tears streamed down her face. "They're good children. They just needed someone to listen." Richard knelt in front of his daughters. For the first time in a long while, he was at their level. "I was wrong," he said, "but from today on, I promise no one will ever hurt you again." Chloe held out her pinky. "Promise for real?" Richard linked his finger with hers. "I promise." In that moment, the Hale mansion, once filled only with marble, money, and emptiness, finally became a home. Richard knew the wounds wouldn't disappear overnight, but he also knew this time he would stay, not as a provider from afar, but as a father. And sometimes family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by those who stay when they could have walked away. One weekend evening, 1 year after the storm that had changed everything, Richard Hale came home earlier than usual. In his hand was not a bouquet ordered from the familiar luxury florist, but a small bundle of wildflowers tied with a thin piece of twine. Flowers growing by the roadside, simple in color, yet vividly alive. Anna had once said she liked them because they don't need anyone's permission to bloom. Richard stepped into the dining room. The scene stirred an old memory. But this time the light was no longer cold. 3 little girls sat around the table, no perfectly pressed dresses, no invisible tension in the air. Lily sat upright with the seriousness of a small adult. Emma was quiet but at peace. Chloe swung her legs beneath the chair. And in the center of them all, with a gentleness no amount of money could buy, was Anna. She wasn't wearing gloves. She wasn't standing off to the side. Just a simple, light blue dress, enough to soften the entire room. "It's ready," Lily said quietly. "It's ready," Chloe echoed enthusiastically. Richard cleared his throat softly at the doorway. 4 heads turned. 4 smiles appeared at once, not explosive, not startled, just the calm joy of people who were certain he would come home. "Dad's home," Emma said softly. Richard stepped inside and set his briefcase down. It felt lighter than before, not because it held fewer documents, but because it carried less weight on his heart. He held the flowers out toward Anna. "I saw these on the way home," he said, "and I thought you'd like them." Anna took them and breathed in their scent. "I really do," she replied with a smile. "Thank you, Richard." The way she said his name, without distance, was still new, and every time she did, his heart skipped, just slightly. "What smells so good?" Richard tilted his head, pretending to be serious. "Is it a good dinner?" "You used to say you only ate expensive food," Lily reminded him pointedly. "That was before I understood what it means to eat with family," Richard replied, casting Anna a meaningful glance. He took off his coat, rolled up the sleeves of his shirt, and made the girls laugh as he put on an apron printed with the words, "Chef of the Day." "Can I help tonight?" he asked Anna. "Yes," she answered, her eyes lighting up with a rare hint of mischief. "As long as you don't turn the tablecloth into a battlefield." Richard laughed and began serving the pasta. It wasn't a grand feast, just hot spaghetti, tomato sauce, basil leaves, and hand-grated cheese. They no longer sat at a long table. The new round table brought everyone closer. "Before we eat," Richard said, placing his hand on the table, "I want to say something." The 3 girls and Anna placed their hands over his. A circle closed. "I'm grateful," Richard said slowly, "because sometimes things must be lost before we learn how to see clearly. Because you girls taught me what courage looks like. And he gently squeezed Anna's hand. Because someone turned a house into a place worth coming home to. Anna lowered her head, her eyes shimmering. "Okay," Chloe broke the moment. "I'm hungry." "Let's eat," Richard laughed. The clinking of forks against plates filled the room. Stories from school, laughter woven between broken sentences. Outside, night settled over the garden, but inside this room, the light was warm and complete. Richard watched Anna as she smiled, a small smear of red sauce at the corner of her lips. And in that moment, he understood something clearly. He had never been this rich, not because of the numbers in his bank account, but because of the people sitting around this table. And so, quietly, without spectacle, a new chapter began, not with vows, but with a simple dinner where love was finally called by its true name.